Hello, everyone who's already joined us. We'll just wait another 1 or 2 minutes to give everyone the chance to get from the talk over here to the Q&A section. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the discussion of the Ruthellen Josselson's wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Ruthellen, for being here with you today for the discussion.
I'm here.
Hello.
Hello.
So everyone who's already attended one of the talks and participated in a discussion, you know already how to use the Q&A tool. For everyone else, it's on the bottom of your screen. Just open it up and send in your question and I will read it to Ruthellen Josselson in order to discuss it. And while our participants will send in their questions using the Q&A tool, I will try to put my first thoughts, if I may, end the question in words. So I was trying to structure what I've already heard and connect it with what you were telling us about the unthought knowns. And you were asking what might be a collective narrative at this time, right? That what you were mentioning. And that's what we are asking. And while we do this, there might be some already dominant narratives reflected. For example, I was thinking the other day in the war language, which is used a lot recently to describe the situation, or by constantly stating, stay home, stay safe, we're in this together. And then I feel we have identified some potential counter narratives we discussed at this conference over the last couple of days, like, and this is what I try for me to like begin to structure a bit, the narrative of the lost future normalcy. We seem to know that the normal has gone, but we also don't know what might take its place. You were mentioning in the talk, and yet I think the way we talk about things, that implies we still have hope that one day it's as if nothing had happened and we go back to normalcy, and we say, well, we'll go back to campus, face-to-face teaching, we'll postponing travels and maybe even schedule them already. And Lan Sepang today showed us earlier today how online counseling became a new normal. And she argues that this certainly has consequences for counseling in general on a long-term perspective. And then I was thinking there's probably the narrative of non-homogeneous experiencing. We are constantly repeating, we are in this together, everyone is on lockdown. But we've also discussed inequalities and indigenous perspectives on the crisis at this conference so far, that not everyone is affected as severely as others. And that the resources in order to arrange with the situations are are not equally distributed. And then I was thinking there's the narrative of solidarity is what I hear a lot and what gives me hope. But at the same time, it kind of leaves me with a huge question mark and a huge how to do this. And Hannah Maratoya referred to solidarity as care in opposite to the war narrative. And Mark Freeman yesterday mentioned the hermeneutics of hope and vigilance and compassion. And finally, and I'm getting to my question, and finally, the narrative of the not knowing. Hank Stan showed us a slide yesterday, and I think it was even one of the first slides of his presentation, psychology and the rush to expertise. So psychology pretends to know before we even know anything, but in the current crisis, not so much so far. And this narrative of not knowing seemed pretty obvious to me until now, that I learned in your talk. It is not that we do not know, it's the unthought known. And I guess this is a rather promising concept. And so my question would be, in the midst of this unthought knowns, how can we support each other finding words and to describe what we feel and what we experience?
It's a wonderful summary and a wonderful question, Irene. And you obviously have thought very deeply about this, and I appreciate that. I'm sure others have too, because I think that you highlight what is one of the major dilemmas here, which is that it's very, very difficult to create a narrative of uncertainty and not knowing, because almost by definition, a narrative is about what we think we know, what we're clear about experiencing. And when we're trying to capture subjective experience here, and obviously collective narrative is some kind of amalgamation of subjective experiences. But subjective experience is rooted right now in this in this sense of elements, of bits of experience that don't right now add up to anything. You can call that uncertainty, for lack of a better word, although I don't think uncertainty is exactly it, because uncertainty is more about this or that or the other thing. But the unthought known, I think, is closer to a kind of amorphous sense of we're really ungrounded, and we just have these glimmers, if we do it all, of what is and what might be and how that might relate to what was. So really communicating about that becomes very difficult, because the experience is not in words. That's the essence of the unthought known, or beta elements, is that these are sensory experiences that are pre-verbal, and they relate to how we feel ourselves in our world. Where are we in relation to the world? And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to put that into words. So I think I took a risk here in trying to talk about that which cannot be talked about. And the not knowing is something that gets lost later. And I'm thinking about our brief conversation that we had before this happened, is that you tried to describe to me the early moments of planning this conference when you didn't know how this would turn out. And now that you know that it's turned out so brilliantly, it's hard to go back to that state of not knowing, of, well, what if this, what if that may not work, how are we going to do this? Those kind, even the desire to say, okay, let's go with it, is in a state of a kind of not knowing. And I think that that's really where we are right now, individually, is that everybody is kind of in this place of we just don't know, and we're grasping for something to know. I don't know if that's a reasonable response, but I'm trying to capture what this ungrounded, not knowing experience is like for people, because I think that this is pretty universally shared, or it's defended against, and people are then finding something to know, to cling to, because that's more comfortable than being in this, we just have no idea where this is going.
Do you think this is where, like, I have the feeling there's a lot of stories of what I would call pseudo resilience and also supremacy that we are hearing. Do you know this comes out of the feeling like there must be something, so we will get over with it, and not recognizing that there is something we cannot know, and there's actually no words for what's going on right now yet?
Well, I think that that is a sufficiently uncomfortable state that, as I said in the talk, needs a container. That we have to find somebody or something that we can believe can contain us in this state of not knowing. And and different people have found different containers. And some of those are people that we say, oh, okay, you know, that's science, for example. We can believe in science. Science will get us out of this. Um, Medicine will get us out of this. Political leader will get us out of this. Something is going to guide us in a positive direction. What's unusual about this particular threat is that it is invisible and it is omnipresent. That is what is unusual. There have been other major threats to our society, to our personal selves, but we see them. We locate them. But here we have to be afraid of some microscopic thing that we can't even know what it is or where it is. So the kind of ungroundedness that leads us to, because one of the things is that we're used to being able to identify threats. You know, it's another country, it's another person, it's a natural, you know, an earthquake, a tsunami, a bombing. These are threats that are visible and identifiable. But what we're up against here is something without a brain, without, totally indiscriminate, that as we understand it, it's probably everywhere. And we don't really know how to defend ourselves against it. So what do you do with a kind of threat like that?
There is lots of questions from the audience coming in, and I would like to start with one Amir Lieblich sent in. And she's saying, I feel that we do have a narrative of 3 stages: normal life before the crisis and all this suffering and losses, and thank heaven going back to normal, to work, family, the restaurants and beaches, open as of tonight in Israel, and presently to travel, holidays, etc. I feel that the strongest threat is what we will so soon forget what had happened and draw no conclusion from it. Does it make any sense to you?
Well, first of all, hi, Amia. It's nice to see you here, Amia, and our friends. So it's lovely to have this conversation. You know, I'm not so sure that we are going back to normal. I think that this is perhaps a shared fantasy, that there's 3 stages: the before, the now, and the after will look much like the before. Um, I simply don't believe that. There has been too much disruption. And even from what I understand is going on in Israel, you have opened now, everybody's gone back to life as they used to have it, and your cases are going up. So where's that going to go? You know, are you going to lock down again, or are you just going to let it spread? Who knows? Who knows where this is going to go? But even if we get it contained reasonably, so that there's only a number of cases that the hospitals can handle and that we can reasonably protect ourselves from using masks and social distancing, even so, we're not going back to normal. There's been too much economic disruption. There has been too much change already in the world as we've known it. And whatever we emerge into is going to be something different than what was. And I don't think we can imagine it yet.
Aaron asks, to what extent does our struggle to believe such a small pathogen could topple society linked to our banishing of previous pandemic events to unthought knowns? Is there more to the banishing or just that?
As I thought about it, it's a great question. I have really puzzled about the fact that, again, as I said in the talk, that the 1918 pandemic didn't even make it into the history books, even though it killed more people than World War One. How come the historians even didn't deal with this? And I think it has to do with the fact that we fundamentally want to believe in human intentionality, that we create history, that it's our actions, um, however valuable or misguided, that we make history happen. And the idea that we are now being, in effect, controlled by this pathogen is something that we simply cannot get our minds around. And where we go is to our beliefs in science or medicine or something that is going to save us from this. We don't know how long that's going to take. And barring that, what do we do? How do we arrange our lives to live with this threat if we need to do that for an extended period of time? I heard somebody on the news this morning um, with what I thought, at least in the moment, was a good idea. Why don't we start manufacturing N95 masks en masse so that everybody can walk around with this protector? That seemed like a good idea. It's the first that I've heard anybody suggest that. But that seems to be the one kind of mask that can actually filter out the virus. I understand that these masks are uncomfortable to wear, but it might make it possible for people to be more out in the world and not be putting their lives and the lives of those they live with and love at risk. So there may be these kind of adaptations that will come, but we don't know that yet.
Do you feel we're focusing too much on the biological and biomedical component of this crisis and kind of get lost sometimes and do not see that there is a lot of manufactured made crisis and how we deal with it, how we conceptualize the social or physical distancing?
And it's also a good question, Irene. Again, I think that it's hard to know still what the psychological effects of all this may be, because we are still pretty isolated from one another. So the idea of the collective sense, although I appreciate all of my colleagues who have talked about organizing social action for social justice, let's do more about climate change. All of these calls, I think, are valuable and important. And yet my sense is, again, without data, that people are in survival mode right now. And there is an atomization that is going on in terms of the small living units and families that that are about people protecting themselves and those they love. So what are the long-term psychological effects? I mean, we can ponder these. I think that they will be there. I think that we have, and this is something that people have written about, at least that I've seen in the media, the sense of becoming unrecognizable to ourselves in a lockdown state, in losing the routines, the rituals, the expected lives that we've been living. There is a kind of a disconnection that people are feeling to themselves. And we don't know where that's going to go in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Sebastian from Chile is writing, I'm writing from Chile's social cultural context that has undergone two major crises in the past 6 months. The first one was a revolution against the injustices in the country. And now we have the coronavirus, which of course has had marginalized people stronger than wealthy people. The normal went away here already in 2019 because the normal was full of inequalities and people did not want to live within that normality. When you talk about a collective narrative, are you talking about a global narrative collective? What do we do with canonical narratives that have helped to establish the injustices of our different sociocultural contexts?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's extremely important. And I am a little bit familiar with Chile because I have a good friend who's there. So I've been kind of following a revolution, and I do have a sense of the two revolutions that have come there. And I think that that there, certainly in Chile and in other places too, there were already efforts um, to interrupt the canonical narrative of injustice. And I think, as many people have pointed out in the United States, what the virus has done is it has kind of stripped off a layer of skin that we had so that we now can see the structural injustice that's built into this society that is just extremely painful to look at when we see, first of all, how dependent we are on people that we have systematically mistreated over long periods of time, and also how much we have made certain classes and groups of people especially vulnerable to this virus. And they are dying at much greater rates than other people. So that it has really put our noses in the mess that we have made of our societies. And that is leading people to think, how can we fix this? What can we do about this? So I think that there are good thoughts that are emerging. I think we're also seeing the way in which our capitalistic system is working against the kinds of values or goals that we would like to have. So we see way too many examples of profiteering off of this crisis. And what are we going to do about that? Some of this is just completely outrageous. Like, there is now in the United States an effort um, to keep companies who force their workers back to work, to keep those companies from being sued by workers who get sick. So this means that they're not liable, they're not responsible if they insist that people come to work in factories to make money for them, but the workers in the front lines lose their lives while the owners work from home and they are protected. Are we gonna allow this? Seems like we're going in that direction. What of people who have been profiteering off of, for example, hand sanitizer? In the early days of the crisis, there were people who went around to all the stores and bought up all the hand sanitizer and then sold it at 5 times the price or 10 times the price online. This is the sort of capitalist mentality. Or groups, I understand, of foreign people who've managed to steal a lot of the money that was allocated for unemployment benefits, walked off with $200 million. So, there's a seamy underside of the capitalistic system here that's operating that is hard to balance off with the social justice goals that we may have, because you don't make money out of social justice, at least not right away. So I'm much more with you know, the dangers that are out there, and I would like to believe in the idealistic hopes, which I know many of my colleagues talked about, and I really appreciate it. And I ended my talk with a rainbow and a sunrise, and so that there's that part of me too. But it seems like if we really think about it, the dangers are also there, and we can't just turn our back on them. We have to try to address them.
Michael Bamberg says, thanks, Ruthellen. Amir showed how narrative sense making is culturally embedded, among other things, in Israeli family structures and traditions of moving closer together in situations of threats. Can you share any experiences that you have with Chinese clients? I'm building on our conversations about Chinese traditions and culture.
Um, well, I have a lot of friends in China, so I've been hearing about what's happened in China. Um, in terms of sort of social coming together, they organize things very differently, from what I understand. For example, when there was a lockdown, there were certain people in the building who were delegated with getting food for everybody in the building. So this is also a cultural difference, that our struggle here has been individually getting food, how we get delivery services. It took me a couple of weeks till I could get deliveries. Now they're available. But in China, they immediately organized not so much within a family, but within a building. So there was a food committee who went and got food and distributed to people in all the different apartments. So there is a history in Chinese culture of being alone together that I don't think we have, at least in American culture. And I'm not going to talk about individualism and collectivism, because I think that this is a specious distinction. But there is historical precedence for managing the group at a group level that we are less familiar with, or really unfamiliar with, in this country. In terms of family coming together, you have so many three-generational families living together in China that one can lock down within a family more easily. So I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear about. One other thing that I have to share about the Chinese is I actually had a Chinese friend here with me at the beginning of March until the middle of March. And she then reported back that we all weren't wearing masks. And so there has been just a flurry for me of Chinese friends writing to offer to ship me masks, because they were totally horrified by the idea that we weren't wearing masks. But of course, at that point, we were told that we shouldn't wear masks, that they didn't help, that it was useless. So I was at pains to try to explain to my Chinese friends that no, we didn't believe in masks here. So I thought that was also an interesting cultural thing. It took us a while to catch up to that.
And that changed also, right? We believe in masks now.
Yeah, that's it. Now we believe in masks. But I was, no, this is a silly Chinese thing, this mask thing. It's so, we don't know.
Maria asks, or says, hello, I'm a developmental psychology professor in Brazil. And I was wondering about the necessity of conceiving of novel theoretical models in psychology based on futurity, the imaginary effort to elaborate self-projection towards future instead of towards the past, in search of the somehow fictional lost past when we had a normal life, so that we critically understand the so-called new normal of whatever comes next in different socio-cultural contexts and its impact over each person's mental life and health.
It's a great way of putting it. I really appreciate that framing, because I think that when you're thinking about normal, we're really talking about what I would call groundedness, which is some sense of expectable life. What is the ground on which we can find ourselves in our world? And I think that it's not going to be exactly the same as it was in the past. It's not going to be as it is in the present, but what is going to be the new grounding? And I think that's the question of the new normal, is what will become canonical? What will we expect? And we have individual projections about that, like what Amia said before. Her hope, or her way of thinking about it, or maybe even her experience, is that you just go back to what was. The ground comes back. I'm less sanguine about that. And then there are others who say, well, but maybe we don't want that ground to come back. Maybe we would like a more humane groundedness. Maybe we would like us to come out of this more caring toward one another, more interested in there being some kind of social justice or equality or humane economic arrangements that allow people to live their lives without so much constraint or prejudice or outright violence. So it's a ground to imagine a future. And I think that that's a point that I perhaps didn't make strongly enough in the talk, which is that the space of the unthought known can be a space of great creativity. It is really where creativity comes from. You can find this in yourself by experiences where you're trying to write something or paint something or think of something, and you just can't quite get it together, and you're frustrated and you keep on trying to think, but nothing really comes. And then all of a sudden something emerges. And that's an example of creativity within the unthought known. You simply allow the unconscious to percolate for a while, and something emerges. And then when we do that together, we have an emergent shared idea that is creative. And I think this conference is an example of that. That what we can think of what we're doing at this conference is putting forth our individual ideas and then seeing what emerges from that. And that's the creative space where we take the elements that are in each of us and allow them to meld and 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 create something new. So in that sense, I'm saying that we are thinking together, feeling together, and thinking together. And to me, again, I tried to say this in the talk, but I'm not sure I said it strongly enough. I think that what we need to preserve is our capacity to think. The most dangerous thing here is losing the capacity to think. So this conference is an example of trying to think together. And it gives me strength and hope that there's other people out there all over the world who are also trying to think about this and to think about what we can do and to talk to one another, to see if there are things that we can together create that will realize some vision of a better world.
Mark Freeman has a question that I think also focuses towards this direction. Great talk with Helen. He says, so thoughtful and wise. I very much appreciate your emphasis on thinking as well as the unknown. Sorry. But I wondered too about the unfelt felt and its resultant vulnerability to false containers like Trump. It is those whose promises aren't based on thought at all.
Well, hello, Mark. It's always wonderful to talk to you. I don't think I don't think there's an unfelt felt. I think the whole point of the beta elements or the unthought known is that it is sensory experience, maybe felt but not put into words. It's embodied. It can be a kind of terror. It can be a kind of hope. But I absolutely agree with you, and I loved your concept of the what did you call it? The vulnerable vacuum. And I thought that was wonderful because that's exactly where vulnerability is, that when we are in this state of, um, again, uncertainty, for lack of a better word for this ungrounded feeling, that we are very much vulnerable to people who come along and say, follow me, I will solve this for you. That the charismatic leader, the dictator, exploits that sense of uncertainty. And we are very much vulnerable. Now, but they offer a narrative. They offer a comforting narrative. And I think if we look at leaders who have been successful, at least with thinking people, they are people who have been willing to admit their own lack of knowledge. So I cited Cuomo was talking about what he doesn't know. I'm very impressed with the work of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who seems to have been the most successful of the world leaders because she has been very open to her own not knowing and her willingness to consult experts and also to make plain what her thought processes are. Now, in this country, from what I understand, the person who has most credibility nationally is still Fauci. So, although Trump is making up all the stuff that he makes up, I'm not sure how many people are relying on him. There's some fringe group that's doing that. There's the conspiracy theorists who are coming up with all kinds of stuff that end up with a small fringe group. I'm not sure that that's appealing to the majority. And again, these are things we don't really have data about. Our knowing is based on what the media tells us, and the media is drawn to the non-canonical. They're drawn to the unusual stories. And they are enabling Trump in this because he comes out with his outrageous stuff, and they then spend the whole day talking about it. And what they don't get is that, and here, I think Dan McAdams' analysis of Trump is very, very apt, that he lives in the moment. And what he lives in the moment for is as a reality star. And his aim is always just to get on the front page and to get people talking about him. So it doesn't really matter to him what he tweets or what he says as long as it gets attention. And the media goes along with this and gives him that attention. And so that makes it seem like he's got more clout, perhaps, than he does. That's my take on it, but who knows? I mean, I have no way of knowing that. And what do you think?
Thank you. There's still a lot of questions. We will not have time for every single one, but I hope we can continue the discussion on Slack. I would like to ask a probably last question. You started your talk telling us that when we invited you to take part at this conference, that you were asking yourself, what can I know? I don't have data, and therefore I cannot know things in the usual way I know things. And I'm very, very happy you accepted our invitation, because now I can ask you, you showed us in your talk, at least this is my interpretation, with the images, the stories we hear, even if they're like just fragmented stories probably right now, the stories we tell ourselves, the histories, we are kind of already in the middle of doing research and of thinking more thoroughly about it. So what would you say, how do we continue as scholars?
Well, great question again, Irene. My hope would be that people really start doing research about this, that those of us who are interested in narrative or in life histories, that we really come up with ways to talk to other people and try to capture what their experience is, not the experiences that we want to hear. So I hope we don't structure it too much and just ask people if they share our political views, but what their actual experience of this has been, recognizing that it's going to be hard to put into words. And that if we can encourage that, or encourage the images, I put a lot of images in my talk, because I think that this is something that is felt rather than articulated. But I think it will be important to try to get that into words in some meaningful ways so that we can make sense out of what this experience is and what it's doing to us psychologically, as well as politically. So I would very much encourage anybody who's listening, who is a researcher, or maybe there's some students who are looking for dissertation topics. This is a fertile time, and people are home. I'm starting to do some interviews now. It's really easy to arrange them because people are home and they have, many cases, happy to have something novel to do. And they'll talk to you, you can record it on Zoom. The data are there for the picking. So let's get to work.
Thank you very much. I think this is a wonderful and very motivating words at the end of our discussion. Thank you so much for your talk again and for being here with us.
And the invitation. Thanks.
Thank you. And everyone, let's continue this discussion on Slack and everywhere else, and let's figure out what we can do next. Thank you very much.